Hello again, and thanks for looking back at the channel. Now I'm at the bench and we've got this troublesome X04 motor. Now this is from the King George VI that I showed in a video the other day. Here's the Loco here. Now in that video I substituted the original motor, but I did say we'd get round to having a look at it. So without any more messing about, I'm going to pop it down and take a couple of resistance readings. Now I've got my best probes out. Look at those, lovely and sharp, so very good for getting a good contact. So my first test is I'm going to look to see whether there's a short circuit to earth. So I'm just going to touch the earth or the frame of the motor, and I'm just going to put a probe onto one of the commutator segments, and that was fine. So we'll test another. That's fine, and we'll test the last one. So that seems like quite good news for a start. We haven't got a short to earth. So the next thing to do now is just test between the segments, and if you pay attention to the screen we'll have a look and see what resistance we're getting between the segments. So that's 6.9 according to this meter on the first, so I'm just going to move it round one more. Seven, so quite similar. And then the last, slightly lower, 6.8, but they're all 6.7, they're all quite near each other. So maybe the windings are all right. Now you might remember on a previous video I was not very happy with that. If you look at the other two soldering joints onto the commutator, they're quite nice and smart, but one of them looks, I don't know, looks a bit suspect. So I'm going to resolder that in a minute. But I think the first thing I'm going to do is start cleaning up the motor a bit. So I'm going to put a bit of protection down, and then I'm going to spray in a little bit of alcohol and see what happens with a really soft brush. So I'm just going to clean the framework around where the brushes go in the commutator. Just turn it there and give it a final. You see already it's looking a lot cleaner, and let's see whether there's any. You see there's quite a lot of black coming out of that already, so there's all sorts of brush debris. Now have a look at this. This is just the normal sort of replacement blade knife, but I've cut a little bit of clock spring, very fine clock spring, made a shape on the end, and it's just the job for going down into the segments of the armature. So hopefully, let's start here. I can just go between the two commutator segments. These are quite narrow. It's funny on these motors, they do vary sometimes, the commutator gaps, but that's going in ever so nicely. Really don't want carbon in there, because obviously with it being a conductor you get too much carbon between the segments and you're going to have some trouble. Right, well I'm quite pleased with that, so I'm going to give it another blast of the alcohol just to wash out any final bits, and then I've got glass fibre brush, so what I'm going to do is I'll just hold the motor and turn the worm wheel. Now, I am trying to do this looking through the camera, but this should give the commutator quite a nice clean. And then we'll give it one final squirt of alcohol. Another little go with the brush. I'm just wondering whether this motor had suffered a chronic over-oiling. And we'll just let that dry. Let me just pat it dry. There's all sorts of bits of debris coming out. But take a look and see what you think. I mean, the whole thing's looking a bit cleaner, isn't it? I think what I'll do now is just try and give those segments a final clean between. So I'll just get my tool, and hopefully you can see it slides through there, playing up with the focus a bit. So I'll move a bit further away. That one is very tight, but it's certainly clean now. Right, and then I've got to dry, because my other glass fibre brush is now wet with alcohol. I'll just give this a final spin with a dryer brush, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, let's have a look. So you can see now that the commutator is lovely and clean. That soldering looks good, that soldering looks good, but I'm not at all happy with that. There's a little bit of end float there. It spins nicely, and you can feel the magnetic force. I don't know what that is. It's just a little bit of, could be a bit of, oh, it's metal, whatever it is. We don't need that. Yeah, that's spinning nicely. Now, what about the magnet, you ask? Let's have a look. Pretty good. Not going to meddle with that. Now, if you can hear something in the background, I've actually got the little J83 that was pulling the gunpowder and firework train just running for a bit of fun on the layout behind me. It's going beautifully, just to keep me company while I work on this motor. Well, that certainly does look good. I can just see something stuck in the worm there. Don't like the look of that, so I'm just going to see whether I can dislodge it. It's really important not to over oil these motors. Once the oil gets up the shaft onto the commutator, you're just going to have poor running all day long. Well, that's spinning beautifully, and actually it's going to be a nice motor. There's not much play in those original bearings. So what's next? Well, I think I'll get the soldering iron and probably just do that. I think I'll try and do this off camera, because I don't want to ruin the motor trying to solder it and look through the camera at the same time. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll take a look at the brushes once I've cleaned those up too. Okay, well, that was not the easiest little bit of soldering, but it's gone quite well, and I'm going to show you the result in a minute. But firstly, I just wanted to show you that I used just a pinprick of flux paste, as well as this solder, which has got flux in it. Just put a pinprick of flux paste on the wire of the armature, and I've left it in the position of the soldering, so that now is the resoldered segment. And to be quite honest, it looks almost identical to the factory ones now. You can see that one's a bit duller, as is that one, but there's our resoldered segment. So maybe I ought to put the meter back together, and we'll just do another series of resistance tests before we get round to putting the brushes in. Now, I've got the brush spring, and I have just given the brushes a really nice clean, so you can see the brass ends of the brushes have been cleaned, so we get good contact. And then if I turn them over, hopefully you can see I've just flattered off those carbons, and hardly any flatting required. So they're like a brand new set of brushes, so they'll go in quite nicely in a minute. But I'll just find my wires, because I was half packing away. Just to say that sometimes it's really quite nice to get some better multimeter wires, because the standard ones can either be a bit thick or they don't, you know, they haven't got very sharp points, so it makes it a bit difficult. But these are lovely silicone wires, very flexible, and the probes themselves, I don't know, let me just show you again, have got really nice good ends. Right, let's see what the resistances look like. So I'm just going to turn the motor now so I can see two segments, and we're going in. So now if you notice that, that's a higher reading, isn't it? We're up to 7.9. which is probably more where I'd expect it to be. 7.9. And just slightly higher there, 8. So just doing that resoldering has changed the resistances through the windings. So I think there was some sort of a bad joint, and we were getting all sorts of errors when we were trying to run this motor. Just going to have another look at this. Let me just go to the earth or the frame of the motor, double check. And I like to check each segment in turn. No, there's definitely no short to earth or to the frame. And once again, if we go through these, that one is reading 8. Move on to the next one. $7.9. And 8.1. Well, 8. They're all about the same, but they're definitely different to when we measured them initially. So whether it was a faulty solder joint from new or something happened to it, I have no idea. But we've got a clean motor, and what I think we'll do is pop the brushes in, and I'll just put it in and just take the body off and put it straight in to the chassis and give it a test on the test track and see whether indeed we've got this motor running a little bit better. So join me in a minute when we test the chassis and see whether we've cured the amazing current draw that this motor had. Okay, well, let me just pick this up carefully, and like I said in the last video showing this, there has been additional lead put in by another person, and I'm leaving it be for traction. But look, there's the original motor cleaned and reunited with its chassis, and it's looking good. Now we're going to test it in a minute, so I've got my fingers crossed. I'll put it on the test track. I have slightly adjusted the camera so you can see the test track, but just before I try it, here's just a quick look at my modified X04. This is the 5-pole bull race version. You can see the bull race in the front of the motor, and there's one in the back. 5-pole armature, and I've changed the plate that holds the brushes. Now, it's nice to have that motor back on the bench because it's really great trying it in different locos. And here's my, this is just an upgraded X03. It's not 5-pole, it's got a standard Tri-ang armature, but it has got 2 bull races. So both my modified motors are now available for further testing, so I shall enjoy having a bit more fun with those. Right, here's the chassis. Let's feed in some power. Well, immediately you can see it's running, and we haven't got the red light. We haven't got the red light on the controller. So I think what we had here was a couple of problems with this motor. Some sort of issue with a soldering problem on the commutator, and also a lot of carbon and oil. So which one was it? I don't know. I mean, the resistance has seemed to suddenly change to a more reasonable figure once the soldering was done. But it could have also been that the excess carbon and oil was playing a part too. But what's really good news is I've now got the original motor, and I'll chat away until it comes back into view, on this Coronation, running beautifully. So when I put it away after I use it, I know that I have a good runner. Now let me just bring it into view. Now, if you remember last week, I did say we were going to look at a Wren Loco. Well, I think I'm probably going to move that forward to next week, because what I'd like to do now is perhaps just put the King George VI back together and give it a final run on the Super 4 layout, share that with you. But we'll move this forward to next week. Now, I can't remember whether I've shown you a variation of one of these before. I know we've definitely seen an LMS one, and we've 100% seen a Southern one, but I want to share this with you. We're going to get this running next week. This is out of long-term storage and possibly never even been out of its box, just open, because just if I pull the instruction sheet to one side, the tissue paper, there's hardly any folds in that. It looks like it's still exactly as it was when the Loco was placed in the box in Basildon. So let's just reveal it slightly. Lovely matte black bodywork. You can see the transfers glinting away, the running number on the back, which is 31337, that BR crest on there. What a lovely little 060 tank. So as we're staying with smaller Locos at the moment, it seems that's going to be a nice item to get running next week. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm just going to put the top back on the box, and I'm going to leave that alone until I see you next time, and we'll get it out of the box for the first time together and see what attention it needs to get running. And then I think what we'll do is we'll keep the J83 that's on the layout at the moment with its little train on the layout, and we'll find something nice for this to pull. So we'll have a Wren 060 up against a Hornby one. This would be an early 1970s version, early to mid, and the Hornby one, as we know, is 1976. Right, well, I'm just going to pop the top back on this lovely Coronation Loco, and then we'll switch over to the main layout for a few minutes of running before we come to the end of the video. Here we are then, and check this out. King George VI back up on the layout, got its original 3-pole Tri-ang X04 in, and we're going to test it shortly. Now, I probably won't know until I edit the video, but when I was putting the body on, I noticed the front bogie wheels were really dirty, so I have cleaned those. So whether you got to see that in the previous section, I don't know, but I've done nothing else to it. Now, just an error I might have made as well. That's not the 1976 J83, it's the 78, and that's the one I hope to run the black R1 with next week. Now, it sounds like I've got a bit of a starling or bird fight going on outside the railway room, but we'll carry on anyway. Let's get some power into this King George VI. Yeah, quite a nice smooth pull away. Let's watch it round. Set it to a really slow speed just for a start, just to see how it goes. And that X04 is indeed nice and quiet. So it's going to come along the back of the layout now and creeping its way through the station. Let's check out if I've got a reading on my meter. So that is actually 0.18, 0.19 of an amp. So if your X04s are drawing that amount, it's not too bad. Now let's give you a demonstration of what Tri-ang gave you with one of these models. I've got my hand on the controller. The back section of the layout is the longest straight, so let's go for full power. Well, that's a speedy Loco indeed. So we'll try that once again. Don't often run these items at full speed, but just very impressive. Well, we still seem to have all the wheels on the track, which is good, so I'm going to try and get some coaches. So slowing right up now because they're at the end of the outer of the double track loop there, so I need to set points B to straight and try and back up onto these coaches. Ooh, seem to have managed to couple on, so we're away. There's a bit of sunlight at that far end of the layout creeping in through the skylights. I'm putting points B back to curve for mainline running, and indeed, yeah, it's lovely to see a bit of sunshine. Well, let's run this at this sort of scale speed, not too fast. Whipping through the station there past this lovely little green J83, so I'm going to bring that out as well. It's going to be great fun next week comparing the little Renault 60 with this Loco. Well, I have to say I'm extremely happy with how that motor has come back to life. I was a bit worried there might be something fairly serious wrong with it, but it seems to me that just resoldering that bad joint and clearing all the carbon and the gunk and oil off the commutator and brushes has brought it back to life, and what a lovely runner it is. So when I put this one away, hopefully the next time I get it out it'll run just as nicely. It is amazing how just one or two small things can really bring a halt to the smooth running of these motors, so it's always worth trying everything with your condemned motors just in case it's something that is easily fixable. Here comes the little 060, and this ran beautifully while I was tinkering away with that motor. I could just hear it behaving itself around the track. So it's had a nice little bit of time on the rails this morning. Okay, well, until next time, when we're going to have a bit of fun bringing that lovely 1970s R1 060 Loco from Wren back to life, I'm going to leave you with these two Locos going around the main lines, and for now I'll just say goodbye.